Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Walk Podcast. So, right away, I just want to apologize for not having a video last week. Just life happens, I guess, sometimes. I started a new job, and it's been an adjustment. I also, some of you may or may not know, but I have a family member who is terminally ill, and so we've been spending time there on the weekends a lot. So, trying to get everything kind of fit into a schedule that works in order to do these podcasts was but a bit difficult this week. I think that I have an idea of how to make this work as things are, but it's a kind of a work in progress, as I've been pretty open about from the beginning of this. That sometimes it may actually look like I know what I'm doing, but I don't. I also want to apologize for any tech audio issues that we had in the last couple weeks. I didn't realize that there was an issue just because when I would re-listen to or watch the podcast, I was doing it on devices that I didn't really notice that there was an audio channel not working. So I believe I have that fixed now, so that's good. So yeah, again, on the things that are going on in my life, please say a prayer. I can use all the prayers you can get. My family can use prayers right now and the things that we're walking out, but such is life. This is the hard part about being on this side of heaven, is that there's sickness, there's disease, there's death, and that's just what we walk, and there's change. And sometimes these changes fit really well in the things that we have set up, and sometimes they don't. And if you remember my first podcast, I talked about Proverbs, I believe it's 19:21, that says, many are the plans on a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purposes that prevail. And so it's funny because I didn't have time, this last week to do what I would normally do. But then, of course, he opened up my Saturday so that I could do this recording so I could get it out next week. So I'm going to start something here. I should backtrack here for a second. I want everyone to know what my goal is in the short term. I would really like to get to a point where I have 2 videos out a week, probably on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And I don't know when I'll get there, guys, but this is what I'm really trying to work hard to get to. And maybe some of these videos are going to be shorter and not so long. The teaching videos, like the one I'm going to do today, might be a little bit longer. But some of the other things might be a little bit shorter, which could make it easier. And I'll be honest with you, last week, I had something where I had basically this prepared that we're going to touch on today, and then something else prepared also. And God called me out and said, hey, I want you to say something else. When it comes to the backside of some of this stuff, editing that was actually easier, to just come out and speak from my heart and to maybe put some bullet points down in notes and then just speak. It was much easier to edit, which you would think is not the way it would go, but that's exactly how it went. And so it gave me hope. And of course, God doesn't think like we think. So he probably was trying to show me that, hey, you can put out on multiple videos and not have to put so much work in on the backside through editing if you just stand up and speak through your heart and just allow me to speak through you. And you talk about the things that you're walking through. So I'm hopeful to do that. I'm not going to put a time on it because I don't want to try to live up to that time, that deadline. I have a deadline for myself that I have in my own head, in my own heart, but I'm not ready to just publicly state that because I don't. If I can't make that, I don't want to mislead anyone into anything, and I don't want my yes to not be yes. I hope they understand that's biblical. Also, your yes means yes, and your no means no. So I'm going to start on something right now that when it came to me, when God kind of gave it to me, I'm going to use the words of the Great Commission. It's kind of that, and I called it the Great Commission series, but I wouldn't really necessarily say that. It's just kind of how it worked in my head. Essentially, what I want to do is I kind of want to talk about, if you are just coming to Christ, or if you haven't come to Christ, what does that look like? What does that step out? We've been talking about Romans 10:9, and I wanted to touch on what Romans 10:9 means and what you mean when you step into that, okay? That's a part of this whole part, is basically wrapped around Romans 10:9, what it means to be saved, what comes after that, how do we grow in Christ, how do we grow in a relationship, what's expected of us as Christians, what should we expect from a church, what should we expect from other Christians in our lives. Those are those things that I wanted to touch on. And so that's a very long thing. I don't even know how many videos that whole part will encompass. But it's going to be more than 1, 2, or 3 for sure, right? So today we're just going to talk about something that the title of this is Why Would Jesus Want Me? And I want to touch on this because, there's many of us, me included, that when we looked at our life and all the things that we've done and all the sin that we committed, why would Jesus Christ even want me? Am I worthy of him after all the things that I've done? So let me just get this out of the way right now. You're not worthy. Okay? You're not. You're not worthy. And frankly, neither am I. Frankly, no one who ever walked on this earth deserved what Jesus did for us. None of us are worthy of the things that he does to us. None of us are worthy to go and stand in front of the Father and remain in his kingdom for eternity. None of us are. Okay, so we got that out of the way. You're not worthy. I'm not worthy. But let's talk about how we're made worthy. But I think in order for us to really understand the truth behind how we've been made worthy, I think we need to understand that what sin is and how sin has been handled. So sin in the Old Testament, or what we would call the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. So like the Old Covenant was the covenant before Christ, which was the Jews, right? And the New Covenant, which was supposed to be the Jews and then the Gentiles, the New Covenant is after Christ. Okay, so in the Old Testament, a lot of people think that the sacrifices that happened in the Old Testament was a daily thing, and every single day you had to kill 10 goats and 14 sheep or whatever. I'm just throwing, numbers out there to be sarcastic. But what I'm saying is a lot of people think that the sacrifice was constant, and that wasn't true. So in the Old Testament, the sacrifice, there was a Day of Atonement, which was once per year, where people would bring sheep and goats and things, and they would find some that had little to no imperfections. You're looking for no imperfections in it. So you're looking for the perfect animal to bring to be sacrificed. And then they would sacrifice it, and then the blood of that sacrifice would forgive their sins for that year. But do you see kind of the tone where we're starting here? So we're looking for perfection to come in and save us. But the problem with that is the blood of goats and bulls were never, ever going to save us and never going to truly give us the forgiveness that we needed in order to be able to see the Father face to face. But I think part of what the Old Covenant and the Old Testament did, at least it did for me, is when you started to understand the things that they would go to, because there were other sacrifices. Sometimes they would have sacrifices where they'd have multiple sacrifices in a week or in a month or what have you. And the idea was about how they were trying to atone for the sin of themselves and of the people and of the Israelites. And what you got from that, when you started to realize how much sacrifice needed to be done, you started to understand the weight of sin. And I think the more you read the Old Testament, you start to go, wow, sin is really heavy. It's a lot heavier than just when you call someone a name while you're driving down the road. That's more weight than you realize. And then when you get into other sin, of course, right? So when we look at the Old Testament and we look at the Old Covenant, when it comes to the sacrifice, what it's pointing to is we're looking for that perfect sacrifice. But it didn't matter how perfect a goat was or a bull was, how little imperfections we could find in them. They weren't perfect. And they certainly couldn't be perfect for us. So everything, all the prophecy in the Old Testament, and then all these lines of sacrifice, as we walk it out, we start to see it pointing to one place, and that's Jesus. It's pointing us to a necessary Messiah in order for us to get washed so that we could stand in front of the Father. So let's go back to this unworthiness. When I say that you weren't worthy and I'm not worthy, I want you to understand when I say no one was worthy, we have what we call heroes of the faith. And the heroes of the faith are Abraham and Moses and David and John the Baptist. And, these are heroes of the faith. These are people that paved the way for Christ to come. And I think if you don't know, let's talk a little bit. I think people need to know. I think people need to understand that these men were not perfect. In fact, they were far from perfect. Every last one of them were sinners. So let's take a look at some of them, shall we? Okay, so let's start with Abraham. So Abraham is a crazy cool story, and I'm not going to get deep into the story of Abraham, but so Abraham and Sarah settle, and they're trying to have an heir, and Sarah can't get pregnant. And they're getting old now. We're talking they're pushing in their 60s and 70s 60s at this point. And they can't get an heir. And so when Abraham prays, God says that he'll give him an heir. Don't worry about it. And he tells him that your children will outnumber the stars if you can count them. And he says your descendants. I shouldn't just say children, but his descendants, right? He But he, like many of us, grew impatient. When I mean by he got impatient, I don't mean by he waited a year or 2 years or even 10. No, he has waited 40 years for an heir, for his wife to get pregnant, and he grew frustrated. And so he decided, and she decided, that they should invite Sarah's slave Hagar into the relationship. So Abraham says, yeah, I'll marry her and then we can have a progeny through her. And so that's exactly what he did. He brought Hagar into his relationship, into his marriage. He got her pregnant, and then she had a child named Ishmael. And this is a big deal, okay? Because the whole covenant of what God promised through the Israelites started in Abraham. So there's the Abrahamic covenant. So that covenant is everything that was promised to the Israelites started with Abraham over here. So when Abraham brought in another woman and committed adultery, okay, and has this child, and then later Sarah gets pregnant with Isaac, there's two people for one covenant. And I'm not going to go deep into this, but I want to point this out because it's very relevant today as we're watching what's going on in Israel. And what you're seeing happening in Israel is that broken covenant. There's the covenant through Isaac that was meant from God, and then there's Ishmael that was from sin, right? And Ishmael, if you don't know this, is directly in line with Islam. Muhammad all came from that line. And Isaac, of course, is the whole line that came to Jesus. So what you have is you have one covenant that's being fought over by two sides. And it's still happening today. We're watching it happen real time today. So when I talked about sin having weight, this is what I'm talking about. So was Abraham worthy of Christ and the righteousness that was credited to him? Probably not. I mean, obviously not. He was a sinner no different than us. So that's one person. So let's talk about Moses. So I'm not going to get into the big story of Moses either, but I will talk about the fact that Moses, one of the first things we read about him after we find out that he gets put in a basket and Pharaoh's daughter finds him, and this crazy way that God connected him back to his own mother and stuff. It's just this crazy cool story. But as he's walking around, he sees an Egyptian attacking a Jew, and he kills the Egyptian. So he committed murder. And so then he runs away. And anyway, God finds him later and then tells him that he needs to come back and get his people out of Egypt, which is the book of Exodus. But so Moses was a murderer. And then there's King David. So David is said by God that he's a man after my own heart. So let's talk about David. So there's a lot of great things that David did. Let's be honest. However, David at one point is on the roof of the palace, and he looks down and he sees a beautiful woman bathing, and her name is Bathsheba. So Bathsheba is married to a man that is at war for David in another area of the country. David hasn't sinned at this point. He saw her, he looked at her, he could have just looked away, walked away from it, and then it would have been fine. But no, what he did was he sent for her, he slept with her, he got her pregnant. In order to cover up his sin, he murdered her husband. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you guys is that we all have sin. We all have stuff that we're carrying into this. That there is nobody that's ever walked this earth that is worthy. We have to be made worthy through Christ. It's not by something we can do. But let's go further into it. Let's talk about the apostles. So the apostles were what? They were fishermen, they were carpenters, they were stoneworkers, they were tax collectors, they were shepherds. These were men that were the lowest of the low in society. They had plenty of sins that they committed. Some of them were even scoundrels. Some of them, especially like the tax collectors, they were known for cheating people out of their money. So there was a lot of stuff that they were not, that would not make them any more righteous than us. These people were the lowest of the low in the hierarchy of society. In fact, some of them I don't even think some of them weren't even allowed to be witnesses like shepherds. By all accounts, all of these people all have one thing in common. They were not worthy of Christ. They were not worthy of his love. They were not worthy of entrance into heaven. Yet, he loves us. He loves us. This was just a band of misfits that came together and God used in miraculous ways. There's one more I want to mention before we move on, and that's the Apostle Paul. So the Apostle Paul's former name was Saul of Tarsus. And Saul of Tarsus is significant because he was on his way to becoming a Pharisee. And he's a brilliant man, and he was well educated and studied, and he was zealous for God. But he hated Christians. In fact, when the first Christian martyr happened, which was Stephen, Paul was a young man at the time, and he was literally there holding the cloaks of the men who stoned Stephen to death. And after that, he went around rounding people up, men and women, these men and women who represented themselves as Christians, and he would imprison them, he'd have them beaten and even killed. So one day, Saul is deciding he's heading to Damascus. He's gotten letters from the chief priests to be able to round these people up and put them in prison, these other Christians. And on his walk down, the risen Jesus appears to him and blinds him in this light. Now the men around him, they all end up on the ground, and the men that were walking with him, they could hear this thunder and they saw the light, but they couldn't hear what Paul could hear, but that was Jesus speaking to him. And there's a whole famous thing where Jesus says to him, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he asks him, who are you, Lord? And he says, I am Jesus of Nazareth. And then he blinds him, and he has to go to Damascus, and Ananias has to come pray over him and open his eyes, but he becomes an instrument for Christ. The same man that was murdering Christians became an instrument for Christ. Guys, what I'm trying to get to is you're not too far gone to be saved. You haven't done too much to receive salvation. He came for you. Let's talk about another misfit. Let's talk about me. So, some of you that are watching this know my story, but some of you maybe do not. So, let's talk about my story for a minute. I'm not going to go deep, but I talked about it in my first video that I put out. So, I had a drug and alcohol problem. I had some violence issues. I definitely had some fornication and hedonistic lifestyles. I'm not highly educated, which with all the you probably guessed that. I have no real status on a worldly level what to speak of. And I know plenty of people that are in ministry that are a lot like me, that didn't come from a line that one would call righteous, so to speak. A lot of us came from very brokenness. But Jesus came for the broken. Jesus came for those who were on the fringes of society, that were powerless, those who were oppressed. He came for those people. What I'm trying to say in all those examples is that I wasn't worthy, I'm not worthy, and other people I know, but the things that I've seen him do through me, the things that I've seen him do through others, the things that I've seen him do through the collective church is amazing. It's amazing. In Luke 5:30-32, it says, "But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, 'Why do you eat and drink with the tax collectors and sinners?' Jesus answered them, 'It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.'" Listen, that's not to say that Jesus isn't going to accept wealthy and powerful people into the kingdom of God if they're willing to humble themselves to him. But especially to the Jewish and the religious leaders, he was speaking to the religious leaders there. He's letting them know that he's coming for those that you look down upon. Those that you oppress, those that you give no power, those that you take advantage of. I've come for them. I've come for them. They are worthy of me. So he's focused on those who don't fit in, those who are constantly being reminded that they're less than, those who feel powerless to the religious elites and the oppressors of their time. But those of us that feel that way now, do you feel like that you have a voice in our society right now? I sure don't. I don't feel like Washington, D.C. cares about me in any way, shape, or form. Maybe you do. If you do, I would love to hear why. Please put it in the comments why you think Washington, D.C. is on your side, because I would love to love to hear that. Frankly, in my opinion, he came for those who felt unloved and unvalued. Again, for those who are broken. So, this kind of started out with, so why would Jesus want me? So why would Jesus want me? Because he loves you so much, he left heaven to come down here and humble himself to become a man and to die on a cross for you and for me and for all who ever walked the face of this planet. And here's the thing, you guys. He could have came however he wanted. When God made us, he made us out of dirt and clay. When Adam was made, he wasn't a baby that grew up. From what Genesis tells us, he made him into a man. Jesus could have just came as a man, but instead he came as a baby. And I truly believe it's because he wanted to show us that he was coming and he had to face everything that we had to face. He had to walk the same way that we have to walk. Jesus didn't come as a king like he deserves to come. No, he came as a lowly peasant. He didn't come as someone who was wealthy with nobility, even though he deserved to be recognized as that. He didn't come as someone who had influence in any way. He came as a baby to a young virgin and a carpenter. Yet when he came as fully man and fully God. Make no mistake about it, he was fully God and fully man. He had all the powers of God the entire time he was here. Imagine the restraint that he had to use having all of that. See, he purposely walked in humility as an example for us. He had no advantages in society whatsoever. He lowered himself to fit right in with the broken, the very broken that I talked about a little bit ago. He lowered himself so that he could fit in with me, so he could fit in with you, so he could fit in with all of us. He came to tell you, I love you. The Father loves you. And you can know the Father because if you know me, then you know the Father. And he was basically saying, and soon I'm going to show you just how much I love you. And he did that when he willingly let himself go to the cross and die for us. You see, there's this crazy thing that a lot of people don't know and don't understand, is that there's nothing that any of us can do to earn God's love, and there's nothing that we can do to lose God's love. He's always going to love us. Those of us that are parents can understand that. If you're not a parent, that's kind of hard to understand. But I can be disappointed in my kid. I can be angry at my kid. But there's nothing he could do to make me stop loving him. I'll always love him. And make no mistake, Jeffrey Dahmer was still loved by his mother probably. But I know one thing for sure, Jeffrey Dahmer was still loved by Christ. And who knows, maybe he came to Christ at the end. I don't know. But the worst people that ever walked the face of this planet were still loved by God. And if they would have just repented and humbled themselves to him, they could have had salvation as well. So when Jesus chose to die for us, he didn't just choose to die. He chose to die. That's the thing, you guys. He was in control the whole time. Don't think for a second that at any time that he was out of control. Everything that happened, he had control over. He allowed every time he got hit, every time he got spit on, every time they lashed him with these various different weapons that literally peeled the skin from his back. And I hate to be graphic, but that's the truth of it. That's the truth of it. And he went to the cross. He carried his cross. All those things were choices for him every single time. He didn't have to do any of it. He could have called on angels. He could have wiped the world out if he wanted to. But instead, as they're driving nails into his hands and feet, he's saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. See, he chose to die that horrific death to make atonement for us. And without that atonement, there is no way for us to get to heaven. There is no way for us to be washed clean of our sins. The Apostle Paul writes, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for the righteous person, though a good person someone might dare to die for. But God demonstrated his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." That's Romans 5, 6 through 8. I think it's important that we understand something here. When Jesus died for us, he did so knowing that most people will never come to him. Look at your life, look at your world. If you're a Christian that's watching this, look around your world. If you're someone who's not a Christian that's watching this, I know that some of this can be hard to understand, but he did die for you. But here's the thing, look around in your life too. How many people do you know are truly Christian? The percentage is pretty low. Most of the people that we know are secular, are people that claim to be atheists or claim to be agnostics or somewhere in between. And they don't know Christ, and they're going to die in their sins. And Jesus died for them too. He died for us all. And that's one of the hardest things for me to wrap my head around when it comes to Christ is, it's one thing for me to go die for my son or for my wife or for someone I love. Because if I died for them and saved them, they'd appreciate me for that sacrifice. But there's billions of people that reject Jesus every single day and die in their sin. Yet he still chose to do it. That, my friends, is love. And all we have to do is say yes to him, which is what Romans 10:9 walks out. And once we say yes to him, we just are supposed to follow his teachings. In my last video, I described that a little bit of what following those teachings should look like, that there should be fruits of your faith. And I'll get into that a little bit again in a future video. See, he's a just God. And there's only one way to heaven. There's only one way to the Father, and that's through Jesus Christ. And I think it's important that people understand that the reason that you're made worthy is through him. And why would Jesus want you? Because he loves you more than you can ever understand. He put you together in your mother's womb. He knows every hair on your head. He knows everything you're ever going to do, every thought you're ever going to have. And I think that's one of the coolest things about it, and the scariest things about it is God knows every one of my thoughts, and yet he still loves me. Because maybe my thoughts don't come out in my words, and maybe I don't act on my thoughts, but I still have them sometimes. Now, as I get closer to Jesus and I become more sanctified, and the more renewal of my mind that happens, those thoughts that are bad are less and less, but they're still there. They still happen. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm better than anybody, because I'm not. But a God that knows all of these things still chooses to remind me that I am his. Why are you worthy of Christ? Because you are his. And all you have to do is accept that you are his, and he'll bless you. He'll bless you, my brother or my sister. He wants to. All he wants from you is a relationship. The works and the things and that stuff, that comes through the relationship. Just like you want to serve your wife, or you want to serve your kid, or you want to serve someone else you love, your grandparents, your neighbor, whatever it is. Once you have a relationship with Jesus, you want to serve him. It feels weird to not. Those are all things that just come alongside of it. But to answer the question, you guys, it's because you're his. And he wants to make you a child of God, and the only way to do that is through Christ. So remember, you don't have to clean up before you come to Christ. You can't wash yourself or be absolved of your sin. Only through Jesus can you get absolution. You don't have to be perfect, because his church is filled with imperfect people. Look no further than right here. Look no further than right here. We're just a bunch of imperfect people trying to walk out our faith as best we can in obedience, in faithfulness. And this is where the call is, you need to find a church, because with that church, you have community that helps you walk this out. It's so difficult to do this by yourself. I'm not saying you can't be saved and not have a church. I'm not saying that. You can, of course, be saved and not have a church, but I'll tell you what, it's really tough to do it. And it's really tough for you to walk out the things that should be walking out with your faith. I can't imagine trying to grow in my faith without a church helping me. There's seasons of my life that I haven't been a part of a church or been really embedded and going deep into something. But for the most part, I always had fellow brothers and sisters that were holding me accountable, and most of them are in my church. It makes sense. I'm going to end on this. And I pray that everybody that watches this gets to this moment, because it is one of the most important things that it was for me, is when I realized that Jesus came and died for me. And I love saying this to people. Let's say all the people that ever existed are alive right now. And so we're at 8 billion people. And let's say you are the only one that is not perfect. Jesus would have came down here, and he'd have made the rest of the righteous people, the other 7,999,999,999 people, beat him, spit on him, humiliate him, and put him on a cross so that he could die and raise from the dead, so that you could come join him in heaven. That's how much you mean to him. That's not a small thing. Another beautiful part is he would do it over and over and over again if he had to. Thank you, Father, he does not have to. The Father's like, nope, you get my son one time. He's staying with me now. But he would if he had to. And so I implore you, anyone that's watching this, pray. Ask Jesus to reveal himself to you in a way that only you would understand. Because he loves you and he wants relationship with you. And life can be better. It's not easy. Better. Not easier. But you can feel joy. You can feel peace. You can feel things that you never thought you could feel. And a joy and a sense of peace that you can't understand until you're with Christ. And so I'm asking you, please, ask Jesus to reveal himself. Say yes to him. If you need help with that, if there's something that you're struggling with, feel free to leave a comment in the comments. Feel free to send me an email. Feel free to find The Walk on Facebook and send me a message through there, and I will gladly try to walk you through and give you whatever you need in order to get you resources that will help you walk through this. Because that's why I'm here. This is why I'm here. I'm here to help people find Christ. I'm here to help people grow in relationship with Christ. I'm here because Jesus asked me to. And I'm doing it because I know that that's what I'm called to. I know that's what we're all called to on some level. And we'll get into that later as we work through this series that I'm rolling out here. So guys, if this helped you, or if you think it would help someone else, if you found value in this, would you please hit the like button for me and subscribe if you're not subscribed? You know, you can also do something else. If you think there's somebody out there that could gain value from this, don't be afraid to share it. You know, you can share it on Facebook or whatever, share the link to people through whatever social media means you want to do it. If you think there's value in it for them, please send them this way. And so I just want to thank you again for your time. And I just want to thank you for the prayers. And I can't wait to see where this is going to go. I'm excited. This new part of my walk is different, and it's overwhelming in some ways. But I'm also very excited to see what God does through this channel. And I'm looking forward to partnering with you all and seeing where this goes. So I just thank you, and I love you. And so until next time, God bless you. I pray protection, provision, favor, and health over each and every one of you.